Good evening, Eugene. How are you?
Good, Jana. How are you tonight?
Great. For those who haven't tuned into our discussion previously, I'm Jana London, founder of the Natural Women's Council, and Eugene Garvin is a retired director of engineering that does all of the research for the Natural Women's Council and the groups that we collaborate with. Tonight, we're talking about the primary school curriculum, and this one is we did the submission to the NCCA back in May 2024. It was based on approximately 200 hours of research from a group of parents, teachers, researchers. Focus groups were attended, many papers were read, lots of information to put together a very robust submission in May 2024. When we did the submission, it was based on research, but then we had to look at the language that was used to make some assumptions as to where it would be headed. Since we did the submission, and even since our last podcast on the primary school curriculum a couple of weeks ago, there's been more information to surface about the primary school curriculum. And this goes down to age 5, or some school students start when they're age 4, junior infants. So it's really, really shocking. This is definitely one to watch, particularly if you have primary school children or grandchildren, nieces and nephews in primary school. This is one that we really have to stop, and we're asking for all of the recommended changes that came from NCCA to be stopped. It is not fit for purpose. So I'll turn it over to you, Eugene, to bring up some slides for everyone.
We'll do a quick review of our original concerns on the primary curriculum. Now, if people have seen that before, then that's fine. You can probably skip through that section. But for people who haven't, we'll talk about those, and then we'll talk about the new information, I guess. Not necessarily new information, this is information we didn't have at the time when we did our original assessment, and we were made aware of it subsequently, and thank you to the people who helped in making us aware of it. So that's we appreciate that. And then to be honest, it reinforces the original assessment we did, and maybe extends it a little bit more, adds a layer to it that we didn't have. And then there's consequences to that. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about some resources that people can educate themselves. I do want to forewarn you, as Jana says, this is going to be pretty shocking. It's actually kind of horrendous, to be honest, because we're going to get down and dirty in terms of the indoctrination plan that's been done here. And it's very systematic. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not any kind of imagination that we have. It's quite blatant and out in the open, and you only need to know where to look and to look in the right places, and you'll see it. And so we're going to show it to you tonight. We didn't have this in May when we did our submission. We could determine from the material at the time that there was a problem, and we alluded to that in our reviews, and we'll go through that again. But nothing could have prepared us for what we've discovered in recent weeks, which is pretty shocking. Again, just to reiterate, we will have links to any of the new stuff in the description. We won't have links to the existing primary curriculum documents. They were in our previous videos, and we have a restriction in terms of what we can put in the description. But any new things we refer to in this video, we will have the links to those, so you can check them out yourself. So we were looking at this. This is the primary curriculum framework document, and some of the language in here talking about human rights, equity, social justice, sustainable development. When you get down to the age group we're talking about here, we just felt this was getting a little bit inappropriate. So no more than the risk assessment that you did, Jana. I know we're not talking about sexual things here. We're not talking about stuff, but we're talking about themes that could be quite disturbing for younger people and just inappropriate for a young learner who's just learning to read and write and do basic mathematics. And you're going to start bringing in social justice and equity and climate alarmism, right? I'm going to call it climate alarmism rather than climate change, because it's alarmism that's what they want to actually teach. There's this notion of co-production came up as well, this notion that the curriculum would be co-produced. And again, with the young learner, that's just ridiculous. Like Paulo Freire used to teach adults, and the notion of doing co-production in a classroom of adults makes a lot of sense. But with 5 and 6-year-olds, it doesn't make sense. So I'm sorry, I don't agree with this.
Age 5, they're only learning, my son learned to read this year. He's reading, he's learning to write, he's learning Irish, he's learning to make new friends at school. He's so young and so innocent and loves to play Lego, and to teach him that he needs to be a responsible global citizen and put that stress on his little 6-year-old shoulders. Again, that is not age and stage appropriate for their development, which violates the Children First Act.
We use this in another presentation just to give people the term pedagogy, what it means, and what the term critical pedagogy means, which is this philosophy based on critical theory. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So this is just a kind of a reference things. This other document was a research document we looked into, and this talked about the pedagogical approach. And we did latch on to this because it was coming down very heavily on the whole critical pedagogy approach. Paulo Freire, who's well cited, and so this was, which is essentially bringing in this whole political dimension into the teaching. This is the hidden curriculum, is how I like to term this. Pedagogy is the hidden curriculum. You don't see it when you look at the curriculum document. But when you bring this in, you bring in this whole Marxist critical theory into the classroom and all that goes with that. And again, we'll talk about it
It's
a bit
the
more as we get into it.
discussions, Eugene, that the teachers can have. So, for example, the
Yeah.
example I gave a moment ago, when I asked to see, the Stay Safe and the SPHE documents that my son will have access to, it doesn't mention that he's going to be told about transgenderism. But when you look at the toolkit or the teacher's discussion points that they have free reign to have, that's where the danger happens. So when parents say, well, I looked it on curriculumonline.ie and the NCCA, everything looks great and all this lovely language, but it's the pedagogical, the discussion, the real lived experience. There's no boundaries and no limits. And, the whistleblower teacher that came forward clearly showed some of the discussions in DCU. That material isn't going to be in the in the school guide that parents see, but it's discussion, it's activities.
Yep. Once you bring in the notion of co-production, you're opening the barn door. You're opening the barn door to anything. And we saw it on that DCU voice clip where the teacher had talked about that one of the children in the class brought up the topic of fisting. So then the class had to have a discussion on fisting and rimming because it was a co-production with the kids. So you open the door to these discussions when you take that approach to learning. So let's move on, because we talked about, again, critical pedagogy. This is a disturbing book. So Kincheloe is cited again in one of those research report tube documents. And this whole anti-Western sentiment that is in critical theory, which is this neo-Marxism, blatant neo-Marxism being brought into the classroom, which is anti-Western. It's anti your own nationality. It's anti-family, as we know. So this is a problem. I have a huge problem with this being brought into young classrooms for 5 to 11-year-olds. Whatever about 12 to 17-year-olds.
And this is also, Eugene, critical race theory, which we know was meant to be on the curriculum. After we pressured, we did see, I think, a statement made that critical race theory, white privilege may not be on the curriculum. It has no place on the curriculum. But if we look at this bottom sentence there, that, critical pedagogy and have demanded understanding of diverse forms of oppression, including class, race, gender, sexual, cultural, religious, colonial, and ability-related concerns. So we're already seeing that, anti-Irish book, anti-family book. It's this Marxism is already being pushed in the class. We've already seen it with the critical race theory proposal, white privilege, the gender, cultural, the anti-Irish. It's already in the classroom, and it's only going to get worse when this primary school curriculum gets rolled out, if it gets rolled out. But we will do everything in our power to stop it in its tracks from being rolled out. It is not fit for purpose in any way.
Yep. So all of this was based, I guess, or this was part of our original assessment, which was kind of based on what we could see in the documents we reviewed. This Marxification of education, this is important. The important point here, this talks about the critical turn when education became leftist and Marxist, which would be somewhere in the last 20 to 30 years. Why it's important is that all of the educational theory associated with teaching, for example, pedagogy, in that last 20 to 30 years, is contaminated with this stuff. It's all queer, it's all critical, it's all based on feminist theory. It's laced with this stuff. It is all the papers produced by the E.J. Renos of this world, etc. It's all in this domain. It's all based on critical theory. It's all hard left indoctrination, basically. So when they quote and say that, we're bringing in the evidence-based best practice, for example, based on the latest theory and scholarship, it's going to be based on this leftist stuff, because that's all that pretty
Mhm.
well exists in the last 20 years. So, so you don't want it to be based on that. Like this is the problem.
Mhm.
So
No.
saying it's evidence based on something that sits in a very well-defined political realm on the hard left. So
Mhm.
let's move on. So this book talks about the critical turn. It's well known, so it's no surprise. If you look at the scholarship in education in this time period, you'll see it. So these are concerns, and again, we expressed this when we went through the original curriculum, particularly for young learners, particularly for that 5 to 11, that you're putting, and this comes from ChatGPT, for example. So we asked ChatGPT to churn this out, to give us this readout, and this is what it came up with. That it may overlook the importance of foundational skills and knowledge, and it will. We know that.
Mm.
It makes standardized testing very difficult, because a co-produced, very fluid kind of practices in the classroom. Your curriculum is being co-produced. How do you do that? The whole notion of social justice, power and privilege overwhelming young learners, and it will do, and it'll cause emotional stress. As we said, it's not age appropriate. So these are issues we highlighted, I guess, and they all come from the fact of using critical pedagogy like this, and using it in a very definite way, as we'll now see as we go through the additional information we have. Now, before we go there, this is something else we didn't have when we talked about it. We knew about the whole school approach. We didn't quite know how whole school it would be. These are taken from a textbook. We'll tell you at the end what textbook they came from. So they talk about non-binary identities, your pronouns, etc. It could be an SPHE book, right? You might think. Well, then you see this other stuff here. Which kind of activist are you? And then they've got Greta Thunberg. No one is too small to make a difference. So you, are 5 years of age, you can make a difference. You can be an activist.
You can
Uh,
go throw
it's,
you can go throw tomato soup at the artwork in the museum.
yeah. So this is this is an English textbook that this is in. So can you imagine, like, how much actual English are you going to go through if this is what's in your books, right? This is just an example. Now, this is a junior cycle book, but I can assure you this is what's coming for the primary curriculum, and we're going to show you that in a minute. Um, so we said stop. We said the primary curriculum, based on what we knew at the time, was not fit to proceed. We said they needed to step back from this education for social justice stuff and get back to the basics. Now, as we'll discover, which is what we're going to go through next, is now we can see why they were taking this approach, and everything we saw was correct.
Mhm.
So let's go through it. What has changed since we provided that feedback? So the first thing that
Gotten even
changed is
worse.
we discovered, yeah, we, this is where the little wheel comes in, right? So this is from the government with their ESD to 2030. ESD stands for Education for Sustainable Development. It's a UNESCO term.
And
There's
this
also
and
a
this
term called
this brochure here was sponsored. I found it there a couple of weeks ago. It's sponsored by, surprise, Roderick O'Gorman, Minister Norma Foley, and Simon Harris. So you can see their three
Yep.
faces with this ESD to 2030, and you can recognize that little rainbow colored lapel. Many of our politicians are wearing it. You may see it even in your local bee garden, or I saw it recently in the library. And people think it's all about a clean world, clean air, bees, and the pollination. But the devil's in the detail. And let me tell you, it's the devil. And this is what it's all about, is all this gender nonsense and indoctrination. That's what it means.
Yeah. So this is it, basically bringing in this ESD. So this is, as I said, it's a kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak, is what we're talking
Hmm.
about here. And you'll see why. So all coming from UNESCO. So this is UNESCO are pushing this, and we'll see it under SDG 4, which is education.
Hmm.
Now, UNESCO have been hard left since the day they were founded. And there's been multiple cases where the American government have chosen to pull out of UNESCO. And one of them here is 1984 with Ronald Reagan. They weren't happy with the politics in UNESCO, which is communist. Basically, that's what it is. It hasn't
Mhm.
changed. They adapt it. They put different words on it. They dress it up in different ways with nice little coloured wheels now. But it's fundamentally communist, and that's the reason the United States have been in and out. And I think Trump is probably going to exit them again. He's going to exit the UN again because he's not going to put up with this
Mhm.
stuff. They're just continually at this all the time, pushing their communist agenda or neo-communist agenda, if I want to call it that. So this is an issue, right? So let's move on. So the government are totally bought in. It's as if we're working for UNESCO. Like, we're so bought into this thing. And here they talk about pedagogy. And so the pedagogy, as we will find out, is totally critical pedagogy. It's this Marxist critical pedagogy all over the place, and it's in the documentation. As I mentioned, if you look online, the UNESCO Digital Library, over 10,000 entries on critical theory in the library. 10,000 entries on critical theory. Not surprising because that's what they're into. And
Parents didn't
ESD
ask
ped.
for this. So, any
No.
principal who's listening, Minister Norma Foley, NCCA, all of you, this was not done in consultation with the parents because all of this stuff that is underpinning the curriculum was not exposed during the consultation that we did the draft submission on in May 2024. We did over 200 hours of research to get to this, but this was not transparent to parents who submitted the consultation. So it was a cloak consultation. It's in violation of the Education Act. It's in violation of Article 42. And I dare say it's in violation of the Children First Act of 2015. It's not age and stage appropriate whatsoever.
Yeah. So when they say ESD pedagogies, which is education for social or sustainable development pedagogies, they mean critical pedagogy. That's what they mean, and
Mhm.
variations on same. So, and we'll see that in a few minutes, actually, in another textbook. So this is coming from we'll have the links to all of these documents. There's an updated status document on that ESD to 2030 thing. So now we get into the NCCA curriculum background that we never covered. So Jan, I said this to you earlier. 2018, you see, the activity on the curriculum started in 2018. We only picked up the documents that were published from, say, 2022 onwards.
Mhm.
We didn't go back to 2018, and we should have. And if we'd gone back to 2018, we'd have discovered what we're going to cover in the next couple of slides. So here there was a whole number of seminars talking about the change to the, supporting change, right, and all this kind of support, system-wide primary curriculum change, so fundamental changes. So first question I'd ask here, is our primary curriculum so broken that we have to undertake a fundamental systematic change of the primary curriculum? Will you
Not at
tell me
all.
that?
We
It
have
is.
a very good, I mean, being a mother of two primary
It-
school children, we have a very good primary school curriculum in Ireland. I'm very pleased with what they're learning, and they're learning,
yeah.
they're doing projects. My daughter's in the process
Yes.
of writing a book. They're learning Irish. They're learning, grow and love religion. They're learning math, and they both love to read. That's what school should be for, those core
Yes.
lessons. This would destroy the fabric of our very good quality, high standard primary school curriculum in Ireland.
Yeah, correct. Our primary school education is to a very high standard right now. It probably needs a level of modernization associated with perhaps STEM and a few things. But to say that it needs transformational change is
Yeah.
to say that it's fundamentally flawed. That's what you're basically saying when you say that. And it is not fundamentally flawed. And that's the problem
It
here.
it will be if this goes through. This will
It
completely
will be. Yeah, it will
deconstruct
be.
the curriculum. It'll destroy it. It will turn our children into dumbed down social justice
Social
warriors.
justice. Let's move on. So this is all online, these seminars. So we'll have links. You can check them out. You can watch them all yourself. We didn't watch them, so we didn't see this beforehand. It was brought to our attention afterwards. So I'm going to put my hand up and say we didn't get to see this stuff. If we had seen it, it would have informed us. So we're going to talk about one of the talks from this guy, Dr. Jones Irwin of DCU in 2018. So it's a long 6 years ago, right? He delivered a keynote speech for the seminar one, and he had this paper titled Towards a Values-Led Redevelopment of the Primary Curriculum. So this is kind of this redevelopment, this totally bottom-up change to the primary curriculum that he's kind of alluding to here, right? So he's from DCU. He's actually one of the lecturers. He did a module on the DCU SPHE course, actually, by the way, which was about critical pedagogy. Like that's what it was, bringing critical pedagogy into SPHE. So that's where we've encountered him before. And he talks about this thing about the values, basically bringing instilling values as part of education. So normally the values or the ethos would come through from the patrons program. If it's a Catholic school or whatever, it would be a Catholic ethos. If it's some other type of school, it would be a different ethos. So people knew when they sent their kids to school, they knew, I'm sending it to that sort of school, so this is the ethos of that school. I know what they're going to get. So basically what he's proposing is that the state take that over. You might still have a nominal patrons program, as we saw when we looked at the curriculum, like it's an hour and a half a week. But if this other stuff, this whole school approach is adopted, and they're getting some other religion, the Marxist religion, in every class every day of the week, that's not going to compete with the 1.5 hour patrons program that they're going to get.
No.
Like, it's going to blow it out of the water. The national curriculum will take over the belief system of your children in school, and using this whole school approach, which I call indoctrination, because that's what it is, because it infects every single subject. And I use the example, and I gave this example to some Fine Gael politicians when they came to the door. I said, when I went to school 40 years ago, or 45 years ago, whatever, when I did English, I did English. When I did geography, I did geography. There was no Catholic religion in that. I went to a Catholic school, but there was no Catholic religion in my English, geography, or maths. It was just maths, right? Whereas now we're going to have Paulo Freire and Henry Giroux and some other stuff, sustainable development stuff coming through in my maths, in my geography, in my English. It'll be
And don't
everywhere.
forget
It'll be in
Tenny
every
and
subject.
Tenny and Belong To are invading those English
Yeah.
lessons.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, because education for social justice and sustainable development includes abortion. It includes trans rights. It includes all of these things. So they'll be getting it in every subject, not just the sustainable, the climate stuff, the bees, as it were, or the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and all these other things. No, it includes all the social justice stuff as well. And they'll get it in the neck in every class. So that's what's going to happen. Like, that's what he's talking about here, and we can see it. And as we bring you through this, we're going to show that to you. So, and he makes references to critical pedagogy, and he's written papers on it. So it's not hidden, right? He's not, like, in fairness, he's just saying it. Like, so this isn't hidden. This video was up there. We just hadn't seen it. So you can take a look at it yourself. You can listen to the video, listen to his words, right? So it's bringing in critical pedagogy, Marxist critical pedagogy into the classroom, and all that goes with it in terms of the UNESCO education for social or sustainable development and social justice. So let's move on, because there's more. Dr. Patrick Sullivan, Deputy CEO of the NCCA. So at this page, again, it's online. You can take a look at it. This is the text, updated 21st of October. So he talks, there's a number of people put their little kind of biopics up here, and they put this is their own words, right? They're talking about themselves and what their interests are. So we talk here, if we teach students today as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. So the words of John Dewey, we'll talk about John Dewey in a minute, because you need to know that reference. John Dewey is not a person you want to be referencing for education, though most people don't really realize that, because he's kind of exalted. And the reason he's exalted is because it suits Marxists and socialists to exalt him, because they would believe in what he did. But what he did to American education was destroy it. And we'll get into that in a minute. So let's talk about John Dewey for a minute, because the reference is made, and it's an unfortunate one. So John Dewey, I kind of nearly call him as the Paulo Freire of his day, because actually, if you look at some of the stuff he talks about, it's kind of there's parallels with Paulo Freire, albeit he was in a different capacity. He was a psychologist. He was also in an administrative capacity in terms of what he was doing with education, and so there's a reference in a book. So I want to give you a reference to a book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, which is a book that talks about the history of American education, and it refers to John Dewey and his role in that. This book is for free. You can get it as a PDF download, or you can pay 50, 60 euro for it if you want it, but you can get it. We'll put a link to the description. You can get the PDF. It's over 700 pages. But if you just do a few searches for John Dewey, you'll get some of the quotes that I have here. And he talks about students being conditioned for a new social order. Now, he was a Fabian socialist, John Dewey, and we'll talk a couple of slides actually talking about Fabian socialism as well in a minute, so you kind of get a feel for that, right? So he had an agenda. He was also a humanist, and his agenda was to get the Bibles out of the classroom, get religion out of the classroom, and he also transformed the education, but for the worst, unfortunately. So he said, he was basically saying, oh, there's problems with the education system. We have to transform it. We have to have progressive education. It's like kind of what we're saying here in Ireland now, that we need to throw out everything that we had, even though it's good, and bring in this new progressive education system, which is not going to be so good, right? Because it's based on ideologies, basically. So you can see it here. And this notion that the school should be social rather than individualistic. He was a collectivist. So this is the Fabian Society, and that's their shield there, which is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And you'll see the reason for that in a minute. So here it is, George Bernard Shaw, very well known, right? Writer, author, and he was a member of the Fabian Society. And in his writing, so his biographers actually allude to his membership of the Fabian Society. And this thing, that the difference from other organizations of this sort was that they were to do it not through revolution, as the kind of Marxist approach, you know, the proletariat rising up through revolution, but by a systematic, progressive legislation enhanced by persuasion and mass education. So this is kind of analogous to the cultural Marxism approach, you know, the long march through the institutions approach that takes like decades to happen because it takes slowly and people can't see it happening until it's too late, perhaps, right? And it's on top of you, which is kind of what we're dealing with in Ireland right now. So he favored gradualism over revolution. He talked about it, wrote it in a paper in 1897. I need to dig that paper up. I haven't looked at it. Socialism will come by prosaic installments of public regulation and public administration enacted by ordinary governments. So you'll get governments like Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, so-called centrist governments, introducing socialism, which they're actually doing, right? They're introducing neo-communism into Ireland with their legislation and their social campaigns that they're doing, and the legislation, the social legislation in particular. So Fabian socialism is real. It's not a far right conspiracy theory. These people exist. They existed and they still exist. They're all over the place. We don't know how much. So to be honest, we don't know how much they. We don't know if they're in Ireland. I'd have no idea, to be honest. But they do exist. They're still there, and you can see the sentiments here, right? So this was John Dewey, was bought into Fabian socialism, and you can see his approach. And there's a quote from John Dewey. I don't have it actually to hand, but it's from one of the books, the Indoctrinating Children to Death. Right, there's a book which we'll refer to later on. And John Dewey talked about bringing in his educational change gradually, so that the parents wouldn't protest, so they wouldn't kind of notice. So you get incremental changes slowly over 10 years, 20 years. So by the time you got to the end of 20 years, you'd actually made massive changes, but they wouldn't notice because you'd bring it in gradually, right? That's the approach. You can see it's the same approach that's been talked about here. So this is it. So, and we have a link to the document that talks about this. So now let's get into it. Teaching for social justice and sustainable development across the primary curriculum. That's not my words. That's the title of a book. That's the title of a book we didn't know about when we did the review. So here it is. Here's the book. It was launched in 2021 by Norma Foley, with the foreword written by Michael D. Higgins, the President of Ireland, authored by 3 main authors from DCU and a total of 22 contributing authors from DCU. And this is the title of the book. And this is a web page. It's a DCU web page, right? The launch was done in DCU. So what's this all about, you might ask? So the first thing is you can see the term social justice and sustainable development. And the other thing you can see is across the primary curriculum, the whole school approach, right? We've seen that already. And boy, do they do it across the curriculum. We're going to see that in a minute. And here it is. Here's that sort of terminology, because this sort of language appears in some of the curriculum documents. Children work towards creating a more just and sustainable world. That's what the children, the 5-year-olds, are going to be working on, right? Brilliant. Mm-hmm. So, and then look at the other thing here. He noted that the book, this is the Professor Dara Keogh here, president of DCU, in his keynote address, DCU's mission to transform lives and education. DCU's mission to transform lives and education. There you go, folks. They see their mission, right? And it's no surprise because that's exactly what they're doing. So here we go, talking about Black Lives Matter. These are from the launch. These are quotations taken from that launch, right? Um, enables teachers to gradually incorporate social justice and sustainability principles and pedagogies into their teaching. So here, and every chapter, and now we're going to go into the book to a level of detail. So you can order it here. You won't get it off Amazon. It's not available on Amazon for like months. You'll have to wait months, but you can get it here. I got a couple of copies from here, so I have a copy to hand. And actually, on this website, you can get the table of contents. We'll talk about the table of contents now in a minute. Now, also chapter 1 of the book you can download, and we'll put a link in the description so you can download it. It's a PDF and you can just read it yourself. And there's kind of enough to give you an inkling. It doesn't get into the individual chapter details, but it'll give you an inkling of the kind of approach, I guess, that they're going to take. So it's worth a read. And here, like in the middle of this paragraph, you can see inspired by Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg, the September school strike for climate action. It's just so they get into it pretty quickly, right? So you can see where this book is going to go. It's no surprise. So here we go, the table of contents. So Michael D. Higgins does the forward, as he would, neo-communist. And then you get into each of the talks about a different subject. Critical historical inquiry for a socially just and sustainable world. Sorry if I'm laughing, Janet, because this is just...
It looks like a conspiracy. If anybody, as you said, if anybody read this and said, "That's not real," order that book.
like apologies
This
to
is
people
it.
because the book is
It's
terrible. So when
outrageous.
you get into it is outrageous. When I saw it first, it's horrific. So literally every subject is contaminated with social and environmental justice. You can see it here, integrating visual arts, right?
I mean, they're going to indoctrinate music class.
I saw the table of contents before I saw the book because I had to wait a week or whatever to get the book. And to be honest, I couldn't believe it. Like, if this looks like a far right conspiracy theory. If somebody had said to me that there's a book like this that brings social justice and this stuff into every subject for you wouldn't believe. Like, I believe it. I'd say this is nonsense. You're pulling my leg. Here it is. It's real. So here it is. It's bringing it into mathematics, into languages, everywhere. Nothing is going to be let off the hook.
Opting out is
And
pointless.
there,
Opting out will be pointless. We will not, as parents, be
no,
able to opt out because the entire curriculum is contaminated with this crap.
yeah. Now look at it down there. Conversations about difference, race, ethnicity, and racism. God, like this is the primary curriculum. Like it's bad enough if this was the junior cycle, I'd have a problem with it. But it's the primary
Age
curriculum.
5, learning about racism and ethnicity and all the,
Yeah.
sustainability.
Here it is, whole school approach, chapter 14. But you can see this is just horrendous. Like this is just unbelievable. And here it is. I mean, we saw one of the subjects for the primary curriculum, which is only a couple of hours a week, is this social and environmental education. And it was bad enough that they were going to get it in that subject. You can see that the points there is sustainable development, social justice. This was in this document, actually. This diagram comes from the document. But they're going to get it in every single subject. Every single subject. So we need to go back to UNESCO. And there's the little wheel with the leave no one behind. Creating the case. So where does this come from? So they have the terminology, ESJ, ESD. As we know, we've got the Pact for the Future, or maybe some people watching this video don't know about that. We did cover this in a separate video, that this has all been signed off. We're all bought into the Pact for the Future and to transform global governments. This is the link to the web page. This is not a link to some far right crazy web page. This is a link to the United Nations web page, right? They're talking about the transform global governments, right? So everything people have been saying for years is actually happening. So here, sustainable development goal number 4, education. And here it is in the book itself. This is the book itself refers back to UNESCO. So the book refers to UNESCO, which is fine because that's where it's coming from. So they're talking about what is education for sustainable development. So they're explaining it in the book and they're referring back to UNESCO. So the linkage is strong there, right? So there's nothing, these things are linked to each other. And here it is, they're quoting from UNESCO here. By 2030, ensure all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among other things, education for sustainable development, sustainable lifestyle, human rights, gender equality for all number of genders, whatever gender you are, promotion of culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, appreciation of cultural diversity, and that. So again, it's a neo-communist organization, UNESCO. This is their neo-communist thought, which is far left thought in here.
It makes me
It
so
is.
angry as a parent of two primary school children to think that this is what they want to push into school. This is the hill we have to die on, protecting those 5-year-old
It
children
is. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
from this
You see, the whole
nonsense.
notion of creating a climate crisis
Hmm.
creates the fact then we have to indoctrinate the kids. We use this as the
Yeah.
excuse to bring this stuff into schools and bring critical theory into schools and destroy the education system. Like,
Hmm.
that's what the climate agenda here is doing. This ESD thing is doing. It's
Yep.
being used as an excuse, basically, an excuse
It's
that people like Michael
it's
D. Higgins
spreading
and
like a
Norma
bad
Foley are.
cancer in
Yeah,
school. It's just
yeah,
spreading like a bad cancer, bad
yeah,
virus right through the schools. It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
contaminating the whole program.
A reference to John Dewey is here, right? And again, you can see the issue, right?
They're age
There we
5.
go.
You have to be a productive member of society. No, sorry, my age 5 needs to learn to read, write, do his
No,
math, and make
no,
friends.
no, no. So, and radical educational philosophies of social transformation, and that term, social transformation, usually means a transformation to communism or socialism. But we're talking neo-communism here generally as the long-term goal. But let's move on. Critical consciousness, again, coming from Paulo Freire. And look at this quote here. Its aim is problematizing the world to enable action upon it. You're going to problematize their world. What gender are you? Are you racist? Are you homophobic? Climate change. The world is burning up. That's what you're going to give
It's
to your little 5 or 6 year old learner, right? Now, I want to highlight something here because we've talked about it again on other videos, the way they conflate the meaning of the term
yeah.
critical thinking. So here they go. Critical thinking in this context refers then to the capacity to identify systems of oppression and inequality, power structures, and normative discourses with the aim to disrupt and transform them. It's critical Marxism, right? That's what that is. That's not critical thinking. That's not the analytical, apolitical form of critical thinking that all of us should have that skill. This is critical Marxism. You're teaching kids to be critical Marxists. That's what you're doing with this stuff, and stealing their actual education away from them, because you're going to spend half the class time discussing these issues of climate
Hmm.
change, social justice, etc. You will not be doing your English reading. You will not be doing your mathematics, your history, your geography, etc. That's the problem. So you're dumbing down. That's the second part of it, right? You can see what they're trying to do. They're using this excuse of
Hmm.
radical climate alarmism. That's the
Hmm.
agenda. So there is a totally other discussion, Jan, as to who's driving this, what are the
Hmm.
motivations for it, and the motivations. Well, control is one of them, right? So that is one of them for
Hmm.
sure. So here we go. Summary. So we're seeing the impact of this indoctrination already with the pseudo subjects that I call them, the well-being subjects, right? Pseudo subjects. They're replacing real subjects. Now, some of the stuff is very valuable. Like, I'm not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. So there's some aspects of SPHE which are absolutely very valuable, and even the whistleblower teacher like Mary Creedon, she actually enjoyed teaching SPHE
Hmm.
originally, and because it was very useful for the kids. There was a lot of good stuff in it, and it's just gone off the rails. Like, that's the problem. It's
It's
gone off
meant
the
to
rails.
be
And
about
see,
well-being, but
yeah,
how it's transformed now is actually harmful to well-being. So, when Mary taught it for
yeah.
the last decade, it was about a healthy well-being, but now it's actually destructive to a child's mental health and well-being. It's doing exactly the opposite of what SPHE is meant to do.
But that's because it's brought in critical theory. It's
Yep.
brought in feminist theory. Feminist theory is a critical theory, and it's brought in
Mhm.
queer theory, and that's the issue. It's been corrupted, politically corrupted. So what was a good subject has been captured, and they brought in
Mhm.
indoctrination into it and destroyed it. And that's the same thing they want to do to English, maths, and all the other subjects now. It's the problem. So this cross-curriculum and contamination, that's the issue.
Mhm.
And this is industrial scale indoctrination. Like, this is Maoist China level indoctrination. You couldn't do more than this. It's unreal. And replacing regular proper education with this. And there will be consequences, the mental health issues for sure for young learners, as well as the dumbing down, as we've said. And parents
Mhm.
haven't sanctioned any of this stuff because they've tried to hide it. Like, one of the issues with the primary curriculum when we went through it, it was so vague. The learning outcomes were so vague. There was this whole notion of co-production going on with the children. What are they actually going to learn was the questions I was scratching my head off on some of the subjects, because I couldn't see what they're actually going to be doing, what they're going to cover. So the consequences, the ultimate consequences, which for some people are the desire, this is what they want to get to, the dumbing down for future generations, their capacity for individual critical thinking in the real sense, not the Marxist critical thinking or critical Marxism. It'll be replaced by this collectivist worldview, basically, which is what the Fabian Society and neo-communists and neo-Marxists want to induce in our children, making them activists for social transformation. So basically, you're telling the kids that the world around you right now is terrible. There's oppression everywhere, all this stuff. So we have to transform the world. The climate is burning up. So we have to take drastic action to address that. So it makes them want to accept, this sustainable post-capitalist society, as I call it, inclusive. So you have to accept all these things that we want to bring in. You have to accept the hate speech legislation. You have to accept what we're going to do to agriculture in Ireland. We need to reclaim the land, to give the land back to the environment. We have to get rid of the national herd or reduce it significantly. We have to restrict our travel. We all have to get electric cars. All of these things, like we need to create this more totalitarian, authoritarian rule, and it's teaching kids to accept that they can no longer think critically themselves, so they rely on the state media, they rely on the state government to do everything for them. They basically lost their freedom. When you don't get educated properly, your freedom is taken away from you. Education is emancipation. If you take that away from kids, you're taking away their freedom and their future. And that's the problem here. So, and this point, the other thing here is that I'm saying, and I'm paraphrasing Paulo Freire here in the red box, because Paulo Freire has a term, a couple of sentences in his book, the Politics of Education, he uses some of the terminology here. Children must die to their parents' values of family, faith, freedom, and country, and be reborn on the side of the oppressed. That's the term that Freire uses. Effectively, as neo-Marxist collectivists, global citizens of this new world United Nations order, basically. That's what it's all about. That's what they're trying to get to. They don't want critical thinkers in the real sense, intelligent kids that can see what the leaves from the trees and can determine what's real and what's not. They want people who are dependent on big government, who will give in to all of this, who'll be good citizens, good global citizens. That's the issue. And we can see it. We can see it in the curriculum. So what are we going to do? Resources and action. So these books are really good to read. The Indoctrinating Our Children to Debt doesn't take too long. It's maybe 10 hours of audio if you take the audio version of it. The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America is going to take a bit more time. It's over 700 pages, but you can be selective. You could go through the John Dewey stuff, for example, discover that and learn his part of it, because it's a PDF. You can search it. James Lindsay has been doing a number of podcasts. He did a Communism 1.0, which was kind of the traditional communism. He did a Communism 2.0, but the Communism 2.5 is the one that's applicable. It's his most recent one. We have the link here. And he talks about woke ideology, critical pedagogy, all that stuff. For somebody who's coming to this totally new, you'd just be saying, this is totally crazy. I can't believe any of this stuff. It's totally crazy. Well, check out the links in the
description. It's a little bit of a red pill. This
Yeah,
might red pill a
get the
few
book.
people who haven't been aware.
You can buy that book. You can buy the DCU book and read it. You could download the ESD for Sustainable Development for 2030 book. We'll have the links to that. We're not talking through our hat here. This stuff will give you all the references. You can educate yourself. And I think this is shocking. If we're going to destroy the futures of our next generation like this, as I say, education is freedom. That's your freedom. That's your ticket to your future. And if you destroy education, you're taking away people's freedom, their liberty. And of course, if you're a neo-communist, a Fabianist, that's not an issue for you. You don't care about that. That's the problem with these people, because that's the societies that they want to create. They want to control societies that are controlled by, basically the elites at the very top of the society control it, and everybody else has to play ball with them.
So thanks everyone for listening. If you feel angry, that's normal. We feel angry and really heated up about this as well. So let's channel that anger, channel that frustration, get off our arses and do something about it, and lobby those, the TDs when the new ones that get in. pressure your schools, pressure the NCCA. Let's just pressure them all with pressure like we've never seen before. Use that anger, use it wisely, and we will stop this. So have a great night, everyone.